call is now being recorded.
Good morning. Welcome back to the session. I hope I'm audible. Okay. Right. So, in our last session, we discussed about the concept of software and their classification, and we also discussed about the differences between the types of software that exist. So, one of them is the system software, and one is the application software. Right. So, we all know that software is basically a collection of programs that is required to accomplish a particular task on your computer system. And depending upon how they are actually used, we can categorize software into two different types. One of them is the system software, which we are discussing. Another one is the application software. So the major difference between the system software and the application software is that the system softwares are usually machine dependent. We discussed this in the last session also. And the application software, they are not machine dependent. So basically, they are machine independent. Or in other words, you can also say that the application software in turn requires the use of the system software, and that's why it becomes machine independent because all the dependency part is handled by the system software. Right. So this is one of the major difference. And other than that, of course, the definition itself says the system software actually makes the computer usable, whereas application software concentrates on solving a particular problem on your computer system. Okay. So we had seen several examples of system software. One of them being text editor, assembler, compiler, loader and linker, okay, debugger, microprocessor, right? And also can consider database management system, software engineering tools. All of these things are system software or any software that actually helps us to access the hardware or helps us to use the hardware easily. Then those type of software we consider as a system software. Okay, so this is basically the definition. So as I mentioned earlier, uh, in order to develop a system software on a computer system, first of all, we need to understand the hardware that exists on it. Okay, so we need to know what are all the features that that particular machine supports. So only then we will be able to write a system software for that. Okay, so as we already know that the system software are machine dependent, so knowing the hardware details are going to be very, very important before I write a system software for that particular machine. So we cannot start by writing system software for machines that exist today. So to make our job easier and to understand well how exactly the system software works, we have considered an hypothetical machine which is called as SIC, Simplified Instructional Computer. So we will first understand and look into the details of these machines, and then for these machines we will develop our system software. Okay, so mainly the assembler, loader, and linker, and of course, on later part, we will also discuss about the compiler, right? So this SIC standard, SIC comes in two different models. One of them is the standard model, another one is the XC model. So XC model basically is the extra equipped or extra expensive. Okay, so it basically stands for extra equipped or extra expensive. Now both of these machines are upward compatible. Upward compatible means lower program written on a lower version can run on higher version, but not vice versa. You can't run a program that's written on SIC XC model on a SIC standard model. So that is one thing that you need to remember. So we looked into some of the features of our SIC standard model. Mainly we are discussing about the following features. So one feature is the memory capacity or the memory organization of the machine. Okay. The second being the uh, register. Okay. The registers that it supports, because you all know that registers are quite important for performing calculations. Okay. The third one is with regard to the data that is supported on this particular machine. The fourth one being the instruction format that we are supposed to follow in order to instruct this particular computer to do something for us. Okay. The fifth one are the different addressing modes, and the sixth one is the instructions, okay, instruction set that are actually supported on this machine. And finally, how the input and output operations are going to be performed. So these are all some of the features that we are supposed to look into, or we are supposed to identify in this particular machine, so that later we can write programs on it. Okay. So we already discussed about this feature, memory. We know that memory is organized into uh, in terms of bytes, 8-bit bytes, and one word is formed by 24 bits or three consecutive bytes. And the memory capacity of this particular machine is only 32 KB, and it has got five different registers. Okay, so coming on to the registers, we have five different registers available, which are AXL, PC, and SW, numbered with 0, 1, 2, 8, and 9. So the accumulator is A, X is the index register, and the L is the linkage register, and PC is the program counter, and SW is the status. Right. So we have already looked into what are the purpose of each one of them. Of course, in detail, we will look into these registers when they are being used. Okay. But of course, you should know that accumulator is used to perform operations, arithmetic operations, or it is supposed to have the operand on which the operation is being performed. X is the index register, L is the linkage register, PC the program counter that stores the address of the next executable instruction, and SW is the status word which actually keeps track of the condition codes. Okay. So this is regarding the memory as well as the register. Now coming into the data, what are the different types of data that is supported? As I already told that it supports only two different types of data. One of them is the integer, the second one is the character type data. So integer data, uh, am I audible properly?
Sir, your voice
Ah,
twice it is occurring, sir.
okay, just a second. Is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right, sorry about that. Okay, so we have two different types of data. One of them is the integer data. So how the integer is organized? Integer is organized as a 24-bit binary number. So we can either have a positive number or we can have negative numbers, negative integer numbers. So if you have positive number, you will represent it in binary. If a negative number, then you will represent that using 2's complement. right? So when it comes to characters, we have got ASCII code, and it will take up around 8 bit of space, and no floating point hardware is present, so we need not deal with any floating point data. So only integer data or numbers without floating point and character data. So only these things can be stored on this computer system. These are the type of data that is supported on this particular SIC machine, right? So next is the instruction format. Okay. So as I said, we are supposed to write system software on this particular machine. But if you want to write system software, first of all, you need to know how exactly this system can be instructed. Okay. So whenever we write program for this particular machine, so this program will contain set of instructions. Okay. So how this instruction is organized? So that is what is looked into under instruction format. Okay. So once we know the instruction format, then it will be easier for us to perform the translation when required. Okay. So that comes to the instruction format. We have a 24-bit format, and the 24-bit format is further divided into the following types. One of them is called as the opcode, which covers around 8 bits. Then we have the flag bit, which is around 1 bit, and then we have the address field, which is having around 15 bits. Okay, so this is the instruction format that is used. Only one instruction format is there, quite simple. So opcode will specify the operation code. X will specify the flag. So this flag value basically determines what is the type of addressing mode that is being used, which is going to discuss next. And then we have the address field, which is around 15 bits. Okay, so this is the instruction format that is supported on this particular machine. Coming on to the addressing mode, as I already mentioned, see, in an instruction, we are supposed to specify the address. So what is this address? This address is the address of the operand. Okay, so this address is the address of the operand. So that in what ways you can specify the address of the operand basically is the addressing mode. Okay, so there are two different ways in which you can specify the address in an instruction in SIC standard model. The first is the direct addressing mode, and the second one is the indexed addressing. So how do you differentiate? So it's easy. Look at the flag bit in the instruction. So when you see that the value of x is 0, then you know that you are using the direct addressing mode. And when you are using the direct addressing mode, then you know that where will be the operand. Okay, so where will be the operand? It's nothing but the target address. So where will be the operand? The operand will be at the address that you have specified. Okay, or in other words, the target address of the operand is nothing but the address that has been specified in the address field. Okay, that is when x is equal to 0, which means that we are using the direct addressing. Means whatever address I have specified, that is the address of the operand. Okay, there is no confusion in that. Second one is the indexed addressing mode. Right, when indexed addressing mode is 1, when indexed addressing mode is used, x value is set to 1. Okay, so when we know that x value is set to 1, we will understand that we are using the indexed addressing mode. Okay, so obviously it's not direct, right? So when you are not using a direct addressing mode and you are using an indexed addressing mode, then the target address is going to vary. So target address now is calculated as address, means whatever is specified over here, plus the contents of the register X. Okay, so I'm writing it in bracket. So whenever we write something in bracket, it means that the contents. Okay, so which content? Content of register X. So you add contents of X with the address that I have specified, you will get the target address for the operand. Means the operand is present at this location. What location? Address plus the content of X register. Got it? So this is the indexed addressing mode that is present. So either you can go with direct addressing mode, which is most of the time, or when you are dealing with complex data structures like an array, you will be using this particular addressing mode, which is the indexed addressing. Okay, so this is regarding the addressing mode that is supported on this machine. Okay, next, see, we now know what is the instruction and we know what are the addressing mode that we can use. Okay, so now we shall look into what are all the instructions that are present. Okay, of course, this is just a brief description of a commonly used instruction on this machine SIC or SIC standard model. These instruction, we can call them as instruction set. Okay, so there's a set of instructions that you can actually make use of, and we shall look into one of them. So there are instructions supported on this machine that will perform load and store operations. Okay, that will perform load and store operations. So load and store operations to where? Load and store operations on registers. Okay, see, we have several registers in SIC, correct? We have got A, X, L, PC, SW, etc. Of course, PC and SW, we may not use them directly in our program, but A, X, L, all of them can be used in our program. For example, if I want to store something in this register, okay, I need an instruction. Got it? If I want to store something in X register, then I would need an instruction. If I want to store something in register L, I would need an instruction. Okay, so we have got instructions for doing that, which comes under the category of load and store. Okay, like for example, if I use LDA, so of course this is a mnemonic that we actually specify. So if I use LDA, this means that I'm loading something into register A. So what I'm going to load into register A, that I have to specify later. Okay, of course this is nothing but the address. If you remember the instruction set contains what? It contains an 8-bit opcode, correct? Operation code. So what is the operation code specified? It specifies an operation. What is this operation right now? It says that load, LD stands for load, into what? Into register A. Okay. Now suppose that register A contains something. Okay, after you have performed some operation, so register A contains some value. So this is register A. Now if I want this register value, which is 10, to be stored somewhere, okay, maybe in memory, right? Then from the accumulator or register A, I have to store it into memory, okay, some memory location, right? For example, something like this, right? So in order to do that, we have got the instruction called as STA, store from the accumulator or store from register A into some address. Okay, you can say that this is the target address. So you will specify some address. So whatever value is present in register A, so that will be stored in the address that you have specified in the instruction. Got it? So like this, there are other load and store instructions. Okay, so I already talked about LDA and STA. So what do you mean by LDX? What do you mean by LDX? It's quite simple, right? So I'm loading something into register X. Got it? Similarly, what is STX? I'm storing something storing something from register X into memory or some address. Got it? So similarly, if I want to load something in register L, what might be the possible instruction? Right? It's very easy. It can be LDL, and if I'm storing something from register L, then it would be STL. Okay, and as I said, PC and SW, we can't access them directly because they are at the control of the processor. So other registers like A, X, and L, we can manipulate. Okay, so to load and store something in these registers A, X, and L, we will use the corresponding instructions LDA, LDX, and LDL. To store something from them, we will use STA, STX, and STL. Got it? So this is how we can load and store values into and out of the registers that exist in our SIC standard model. Okay. Now, why did we store those values? Right? Why did we put value into register A or register X or register L? Right? So, apart from register L, we can put values into register A and X and other registers if they exist in order to perform operations. Okay. What type of operations we can perform? We can perform arithmetic operations. Okay, because we know that we are dealing with integer data. Okay, so integer data means obviously we can perform integer arithmetic. So what type of arithmetic operations we can perform, and what is the instructions that we are supposed to use if we want to perform those operations, right? So what are the major arithmetic operations? Of course, we have got addition, for which we are going to use the mnemonic add. There is subtraction, for which we are going to use sub. There is multiplication, for which we are going to use MUL, and there is division, for which we are going to use div. Okay, so using these four mnemonics or instructions, we can perform arithmetic operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division respectively. Okay, so loading and storing and arithmetic operations. Okay, now sometimes we may have to compare one value with another value. Okay, so for that purpose, we have got a specific instruction called as compare. So this compare will compare the value of two registers. Okay, and whatever the result is obtained, so that result is going to be stored in the status word. Okay, so it compares two values, and then the result of that comparison is going to be recorded in status word or as a bit in status word. Got it? So similarly, we have got jump instructions. Now, why do I require jump instructions? Conditional branching. Okay, so to perform conditional branching, I will be using the following instructions. Like for example, jump if less than, jump if equal to, or jump if greater than. Okay, following these instructions, you are supposed to specify an address to which the control has to be transferred. I believe this is clear. Okay, the next instruction is especially used for subroutine linkage, or in other words, this instruction is essential when you have written your program in terms of subroutine. Subroutine means functions. Okay, like for example, you have one function here and you have one function here, or subroutine. I'll call it as subroutine here because we don't call them as a function in case of assembly level language. Okay, so I'll call them as subroutine. So we have subroutine A and we have subroutine B. Okay, now based on some condition, I need to jump from A to B. Okay, right? So what I will do is I will use this instruction called as JSub. Okay, jump to subroutine. Which subroutine that I need to specify. For example, if my aim is to jump to B, then I need to specify JSub B. So as soon as the processor sees this instruction, it will know that the control has to be transferred to B. Okay. Now assume that after all of this, we have executed few instructions in B. Now I need to go back to A. Okay. So, or maybe I want to go back to C. Right. So how do I go to that subroutine? Once again, it's quite simple. J sub C. Right. So control will be immediately transferred to this C. Right. And now I need to get back to A. So I will write in C J sub A. So now the control comes back to A and it will start the execution from where it actually left. Okay. So like this, if you have subroutines in your program, then you can make a jump from one subroutine to another subroutine by making use of JSub instruction. Okay. Now, one of the inner detail that you are supposed to know here is whenever you are using JSub instruction, the register L is going to be utilized. Okay. Like for example, I told that here I'm jumping from subroutine A to subroutine B. Okay. Now suppose if this was not required, if J sub C was not required, and assume that we don't have this particular subroutine, and B has completed its execution. Okay, B has completed its execution. So once B completes its execution, where the control has to be transferred? Hope you are getting the question. So A, subroutine A was executing. Now there came an instruction that said jump to subroutine B. So we transferred, or the processor transferred the control to subroutine B, and it began its execution. And it completed its execution at this particular point. Okay, now where the control has to be transferred? Right, the control has to be transferred back to A, right, and where? Exactly after the JSub instruction, correct, exactly after the JSub instruction. Okay, now remember PC, not Priyanka Chopra, the PC, program counter. Right, so this program counter, okay, I'll just make things clear here. So let me write down program A and program B properly. So I will assume that this is the address at which program A starts, okay, and program B starts at 2000. Okay, so this is subroutine A, this is subroutine B, and we had our JSub instruction. Sorry. We had our JSub instruction here. So jump to subroutine B. Okay, I will write down the address of that instruction. So 1010, for example. Okay, the next instruction, I will simply write down some value here, 1013. Okay, and then after that, the program will continue. Right. So here at 2000, we had B. Right. So when JSub B was called, I told that the control is going to be transferred to 2000. And program or subroutine B will continue its execution. Okay. And after program B completes, we have to get back to A. That's what one of you also answered. And of course, it is correct. We have to get back to A. Okay. Now remember that I have not written any instruction JSub A. Okay. Because if I write JSub A here, what will happen? It will come to 1000 because A starts at 1000, right? But already we have executed instructions of A. I don't want the control to come to 1000. Where do I want the control to come? I want the control to come to 1013. Okay, right? So when we are leaving A to execute B, right? So what we are supposed to do? We are supposed to save the address to which we have to come back. Okay, right? How do we do that? Right. So as I mentioned, we have PC, correct? So what will PC store? It will always store the address of the next executable instruction. Okay. So when JSub B is executed, JSub B is executed, right? What is the address of the next executable instruction? An instruction at 1010 is being executed, which is called as JSub B. Okay, what will be the result of this instruction? I don't know. Still it is executing. But if this instruction is executing, what is the address of the next executable instruction in this subroutine or in this program? Right? So it is 1013, correct? So PC will actually have the value 1013. Okay, because currently 1010 instruction is getting executed. So which is the next instruction? Next instruction is presented 1013. So PC will store what? PC will store the address of the next executable instruction. So which is the next executable instruction? Whatever is present at 1030, right? So, but when this instruction completes, now we know that the control has to be transferred to 2000 because B starts from there. Okay, but I know that when this B completes its execution, I have to come back and continue with my execution of A from 1013. Okay, so when I go from A to B, what I will do is I will store the value of the next executable instruction, which is currently in PC, into L. Okay, so L will actually contain this value, right? So that's why it's called as a linkage register. Okay, that's why it's called as the linkage register, right? And now when do we come back from B, or how do we come back from B? So once the instructions in B are executed, just like how we jump from A to B by using JSON, we will return from B to A by using an instruction called as rsub. Okay, so when I call rsub, it will now look at linkage register, whatever was stored previously. Now linkage register says that you have to go to 1013. So control will be transferred to 1013 and it will continue its execution from there. Got it? So this is how the linkage register is used along with the instructions JSUB as well as RSUB. So you can actually perform unconditional jump. Okay, so these are conditional jumps, right? But these are unconditional jumps. So JSUB and RSUB, by using the linkage register to perform jump from one subroutine to another subroutine. So this is especially required when you have got multiple subroutines in your program, okay, or multiple functions in your program, or if you have written the logic using different subroutines. So what will happen when you use JSUB? When you use JSUB, it jumps to the subroutine that is specified. Okay, I said JSUB B. So B was a subroutine. But before jumping, what it does? It will place the return address in the register N. What is the return address in this case? So this was at 1010. The return address was 1013. See, because suppose if this instruction was not a JSUB instruction, then obviously we would have moved on to execute 1013. But because this is a jump instruction, we jumped from this to from A to B. So we transferred the control, right? We made an alteration. So when we made an alteration, we have to change it back. So when you are changing it back, we need to know where we have to continue our execution from. So that is where this value is going to be useful, and it is going to be stored in the linkage register. Okay. Now how do we come back? As I said, we need to use the instruction rsub. So this will return by jumping to the address that is already stored in the register N. Right? Now these are only a few set of instructions that we have discussed here. To perform different types of operations, we have got different types of instructions. Okay, so the book that we are supposed to refer, in that there is an appendix which comprises of all the different types of instruction set that are supported on SIC as well as SIC bar XC. Okay, so if you get the book or a soft copy of it, I would like you to refer this appendix to know more about different types of instruction sets that are supported on SIC machine. Okay, so these are just a few. There are maybe around 80 to 90 instructions that are supported on both SIC as well as SIC bar XC. So simply go through the appendix, you will get an idea regarding what instructions are supported. Okay, or maybe at the end of this chapter, I will give an overview of that. Right. So I hope you have followed what are the instruction sets that are supported. Okay. Now let us look into the input and output operation. Right. So input and output operation mainly in terms of the devices that can be connected to this particular SIC. Okay. So our devices on this SIC machine. So whatever input and output operation needs to be performed, it requires a device, and the transfer of data between these devices and the SIC machine is done in the following way. So it can only transfer 1 byte of data at a time, and it will transfer the data from register A, or from the rightmost 8 bits of register A. Okay, so it can be visualized something like this. So let me consider that this is one of the output device, or maybe an input device. Okay, this input or output device. So whenever you are supposed to transfer data from data to an input or an output device, that has to be present in accumulator. Okay, data transfer will take place from the accumulator. You can't directly transfer data from memory to input and output device. So you're supposed to transfer data from the accumulator, which data has to be brought into the accumulator and then transferred. Okay, so like an input device can be something like a keyboard. Okay, I press a key, so the data from the input device has to be stored in memory. So how it will happen? Okay, let me draw that out as well. So for example, memory. So I press a key on my input device. So it has to be stored in memory. Okay, now it cannot be directly stored. So what has to happen? Whatever key you have pressed, so that has to be transferred to accumulator A, and from accumulator A, it has to be transferred to memory. Okay, so if you are transmitting a data that is 1 byte, okay, so that's the maximum size that is transferable at any point of time. So 1 byte of data will come to accumulator A, and then that will be transferred to memory later. Okay, we are supposed to use some instruction to do that. I'm just explaining you the mechanism. Similarly, there is something in memory. Okay, let me assume again 8-bit data or 1 byte data. So if this has to come to an output device, okay, then the transfer has to take place once again through accumulator A. So first data has to be transferred from memory to accumulator, and then from accumulator to the output device. Got it? So what if we have more than 1 byte data? Okay, what if we have more than 1 byte data? So as we already know, integer takes around how much? 3 bytes. Okay, so integer is around 1 word. So if you have a 3-byte data, how the transfer is going to take place? So something like this. So this is the 3-byte data. Okay, so 00 something is there. Right? So this has to be transferred to an output device, let me assume. So this can be transferred only 1 byte at a time. Okay, so from where the rightmost bits of register A are going to be transferred first. So what is the rightmost bit? So this is the rightmost bits. Okay, so first this is going to be transferred. After that, this is going to be transferred. After that, this is going to be transferred. So there are 3 times this operation has to be performed to transfer one integer value. Okay, so you know that when we are doing something again and again, obviously we may need the help of a looping structure, okay, to write our program. Got it? So the rightmost value is going to be transferred 1 byte at a time, and this is how the transfer is going to take place, whether it be from input device or whether it be to an output device. Okay, now there may be different devices that are connected onto the SIC machine, right? For example, this is the SIC machine, and we have got an input device, we have got an output device, we have got one more input device. So you know that normally we can connect multiple input and output devices for our computer system. Okay, no matter which type of device you connect, each device will have an 8-bit code associated with it. Okay, each device has an 8-bit code associated with it, which will uniquely identify that particular device. Okay, it can be an input device also, it can be an output device also. So irrespective of what type of device it is, every device will have an 8-bit code. Okay, now why do we require this code? As I said, we need to identify uniquely which device we are trying to communicate. Okay, but before we communicate anything, we are supposed to test whether the device is ready or not, and this is where particular instruction set exists for performing input and output operation. Okay, so what are those instructions? Let us look at. So one of the instruction is the test device or TD. Okay, so for example, as I said, let me assume that there is a 8-bit code associated with one of the device. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. For example, this. So the device number is 3. Okay, device number is 3. So I am first checking whether the device 3 is ready or not. Okay, whether the device 3 is ready or not. Alright, okay, I can simply, for explanation, I'll write TD 3. So what does it mean? This means that I'm testing whether the device 3 is ready or not. If the device is ready, then I can perform operation on it. Okay, now how will I know whether this device is ready or not? Okay, so when this instruction gets executed, remember status word. So this status word will store the condition code. Okay, so condition code will be used in order to determine whether the device is ready or not. So when we execute TD, and if the condition code is set to less than, okay, if the condition code is set to less than, then it means that the device is not ready. Means you cannot perform any operation on that particular device. Okay, so when I execute this instruction TD, and if it is set to equal to, if the condition code is set to equal to, then if the condition code is set to equal to, then it is ready. Okay, or vice versa. I believe it is written ulta here. If it is less than, device is ready. If it is equal to, then the device is not ready. Okay, irrespective of what it is, condition codes are going to be set. So based on the condition code, we will come to know whether the device is ready or not. Okay, so if the device is not ready, we are not supposed to do any operation on it. Okay, so when the device becomes ready, in this case, when the condition code is set to less than, then I can perform operation. What operation? I can perform input and output operation. So what are the input and output operation? Only there are two. One of them is either you can read from a device, read from an input device, or you can write to an output device. Okay, so only two operations you can perform. So either you can read from an input device or you can write to an output device. And the mnemonics that are used for this are RD and WD. Got it? Okay. So first you need to check whether the device is ready or not. For example, test if device is 3. Okay. So as I said, when this instruction executes, you will have the condition code set. Okay. So let me label this as some point P. Okay. I'll tell you why I am labeling this. So I'm testing the device. So if the condition code is equal to, okay, so if it is equal to, then I will jump to P. Okay, so what does this do? This will actually keep us in a loop. Means we will be waiting until the device is ready. Okay, then what I will do, if the device is ready, then of course this will not execute. So we'll come back to the next instruction. So then I can read from device 3. Got it? So our logic will be something like this. Whenever we are writing programs for this SIC machine using the input and output operation. Okay. So TD is for test device, RD is for read data, and WD is for write data. Okay. So each device is having an 8-bit code using which you can perform input and output operation. Okay. So this is about the SIC standard model. Right. So now coming on to the features of SIC bar XC. Of course, here we are going to highlight the differences because, as I said, SIC bar XC is having extra equipment. That's it. Okay, so it is having extra equipment. So, of course, when it has got extra equipment, it has got extra features. Okay, of course, features will be almost similar to what we are going to discuss. So, discuss regarding memory, we'll discuss about the instruction format, we will discuss about the different types of registers, we will discuss about the instruction set that is supported, and we are also going to discuss about addressing mode. We are also going to discuss about input and output operations. Okay, so all of these things, whatever we have discussed for SIC standard model, the same thing we are going to discuss in SIC bar XC in contrast with SIC standard model. Okay, so let us start by looking at the memory. So what was the memory in SIC standard model? I'll write it here. So SIC standard model, I'll write SIC bar SM. Okay, so it was around 32 KB, right? So what is the memory in SIC bar XC? It is around 1024 KB or 1 MB. Okay, so it is around 1 MB in size. This is the major difference between SIC as well as SIC bar XC. So in terms of memory, we have gotten advancement. So from 32 KB, it has been increased to 1 MB, right? The organization of memory is the same. So we have got 8-bit byte and we have got one word making up one integer. Okay, so one word. So 3 consecutive bytes will make up one word. Okay, so all those things are same. Only difference is the size of the memory. The size of the memory is 1 MB in size. Right? Now when it comes to registers, what were the registers present? How many registers were present? First of all, 5 registers were present. Okay, which were there? A, X, L, PC and SW. Okay, so these are the 5 registers that are present in SIC bar SM, which is standard model. In SIC bar XC, all of these registers are present, but along with this, extra registers are also present. That's why extra equipped. Okay, so which are those extra registers? Right? So which are those extra registers? So first register is B, second register is S, third register is T, and fourth register is F. Okay, B, S, T, F. Right? If you remember the numbering system of the registers, A was 0, X was 1, L was 2, PC was 8, and SW was 9. Correct? 0, 1, 2, 8, and 9. So if you wonder what happened after 2, directly we jump to 8. Okay, now we have the answer. Okay, so after 2, 3 is the base register, which is B. 4 is S, which is the general working register or a general purpose register. 5 is T, which is also one more general purpose register that is present, extra register. And 6 one is F, which is the floating point accumulator. Okay, floating point accumulator. Now the question is, where is 7? Okay, so 6 and 7, both of them are F, because F is a 48-bit register. Okay, F is a 48-bit register, means it occupies 2 words, right? So therefore 6 and 7 are occupied by F numbering. Okay, and after 7, which is there? 8. So obviously 8 is PC. After 8, which is there? 9, which is SW. Got it? So all the 5 registers are present, but along with that, we have got extra registers. So A, X, L, PC, SW, all of them are present. But along with these things, we have got extra registers B, S, T, and F. Okay, now one more difference is that we have got a floating point accumulator, which is around 48 bits in size. So when you have a floating point accumulator, obviously, what does it mean? It means that we will have floating point arithmetic. So one of the extra data that is supported on SIC bar XC is the floating point values. Okay, so apart from integer and character, both of them are same in case of SIC and SIC bar XC, but we have got 48-bit floating point numbers. And the representation of those floating point numbers is as follows. I believe you are familiar with this representation. So we've got a sign, we've got the exponent, and we have got the fraction. Okay, so the size of this is in total 48 bits, right? Out of 48, 1 bit is reserved for sign, 11 bit is reserved for exponent, and 36 bit is represented for fraction. So whatever value is present here, you put it in this equation, you will get the value, floating point value, okay, of a particular number. Got it? So this is how floating point number is represented. So integer is 24 bits, 2's complement representation, character is 8 bits, ASCII representation, and floating point number is this one, exponent and fraction representation, or exponent and mantissa representation. Got it? So this is how the integer data is supported. Okay. So we talked about memory, we talked about registers, and we talked about data format and the differences that exist, right? So now the important stuff, which is one of the highlight of SIC bar XC, because of the extra memory that we have. Okay, now because of that extra memory, we are able to come up with extra features. Okay, and the extra features are reflected in terms of the instruction formats that are supported. Okay, and the extra features are also supported in terms of the addressing boards that are supported. Also in terms of the various instruction sets that are supported on this machine. Okay, so of course it's a complex topic which I cannot complete today. So I will complete that in the next session, right? But up to this point, I believe you have followed. So if you have any doubts, you can put it in the message box here, or if you can ask directly also. Meanwhile, I will take the attendance. All right, as you can see, you can have taken the attendance. So this basically has all the information regarding when you have left, when you have joined, okay, and other details also. Okay, this is for my reference, of course. I will validate it later. So what you are supposed to do is, I will share an attendance sheet with you. So you are supposed to put your attendance there as well. Okay. So I'll share the attendance after this class. Do you have any doubts up to this point? Of course, no doubt, I believe. If you have any doubts, then as usual, you can put it in the chat box here. Okay, if not in this session, of course, before the next session, or you can contact me directly also on WhatsApp or whatever means possible. And of course, I will also share this video. Some student had asked me to share this video. I couldn't do it. I will share this video with you on Google Classroom. So do look into it. And if you find any doubts or if you want any clarifications, then do contact. Okay. So I'll stop here and I'll continue in the next session. Thank you, students.